These days, I have been and am still being asked as to why Modi wanted more than 400 seats in the 18th Parliament of India, Lok Sabha. Now, he characteristically perhaps left the reason for it or the rationale for it vague. To make a statement of that significance, that a prime minister needs 400 or more seats in order to carry out his responsibilities or in order to govern the country effectively, presumably for the good of the nation, leaving the whole country speculating and a large section of the people anxious and worried no end, I think is grossly unfair. It is irresponsible, and a person who adorns the office of the Prime Minister of India perhaps should not indulge in exercises of this kind, even if he thinks that such an exercise could ensure for him and his party substantial electoral gains. Because nobody wants to live in uncertainty, nobody wants to live in anxiety and insecurity. Now, therefore, it's natural that many people, in fact, practically everyone in this country who is given to thinking on any issue at all, is even today keen to find out as to what would be the complex or confluence of circumstances or the considerations that made the Prime Minister aim at nothing less than 400 Lok Sabha seats. And he was, during his electoral speeches, pleading with the people to give him. And he always said, give me, give me, give me, which also indicates the mindset, and that's the reason by making a reference to it. It's not to the NDA coalition, it's not even to BJP, it is to him in person that the 400 Lok Sabha seats are to be guaranteed. So, how are we to understand the motive behind it? And particularly the context, or given the fact that he, that is Narendra Modi ji, has chosen to be cryptic about it and withhold the reason behind making such an important request. It's all right to make requests, but responsible communication with the people of a nation demands that the reason for the request is also stated. That's the only honest way of dealing with them. Because when a person chooses to keep the intention or the purpose in obscurity, the only reason could be that he wants to use the power thus accorded to him in ways that the people who give him that power may not feel particularly happy about. If the power derived from having such a brutal majority in the Lok Sabha is to be used for benign and recognized goals and purposes that are in harmony with the grammar of democracy, then there should be no problem in revealing the purpose. So the Prime Minister should say, in order to do this, in order to achieve this, in order to gain this purpose, in order to do this good to the country, in order to solve this problem, please give me 400 seats. Because without these 400 seats, I can't achieve these goals which are of direct relevance to your welfare. Then it makes sense. Then all speculations are laid to rest, and I would not have to address an issue like this. And as I said at the outset, the issue is being addressed because many people have shared with me their desire to know as to what could be or what could have been the thinking underlying such an idea. Now, here is what I'm going to say. But before I say what I have to say, I must say this by way of a caveat, that is, speculating on the intention of a person's statement or action is always a risky thing, because we can never know enough of an individual to be able to speculate with 100% correctness or confidence about what he would have intended. Therefore, we must leave a very wide margin for error whenever we make a speculation or a guesswork about what a person could have intended by saying such and such or doing such and such. So that's a caveat. Now let's proceed. Now, in order to perhaps understand this particular need in perspective, in my line of thought, what we need to do is to regard the doctrine of the separation of powers. The doctrine of the separation of powers, with which every student, undergraduate student of political science, is familiar. Stated very simply, the doctrine of the separation of powers means that the three pillars of democracy, the executive, the parliament, the judiciary, have their own separate, well-defined domains of authority, and they should work in an arrangement of checks and balances towards each other, so that together they ensure the health and wholeness of a democracy or democratic form of government. For example, if the state or the executive enjoys untrammeled or unbridled or unlimited powers, then it is apt to become autocratic and despotic. So, the legislature and the judiciary must stand on behalf of the people, if it's a democracy, and ensure that the power vested with the state is not used in a manner harmful to the rights, the liberties, the life, and the welfare of citizens. That is why the autonomy of the parliament and the judiciary is extremely important in a democratic way of governance. So that's the doctrine of separation of powers. Now, what happens in a democracy where one party dominates brutally? Brutally is the word. Now, the only reason that I can possibly see, and I could be wrong, I could be limited, the only reason I can think of at this time, and having reflected on this for at least 1 month, I'm not making this statement in an offhand, casual, impetuous kind of way. I've thought and thought and thought about this. The only reason why the chief executive of the state, namely the Prime Minister in the Indian form of democracy, the American system, it is the President. The only reason why the Prime Minister wants 400 seats is to be able to dominate parliamentary proceedings to an extraordinary extent. My main reason for saying this is the way the 17th Lok Sabha functioned. Even though Modi and his government did not have 400 seats, still the way parliamentary proceedings were handled under the guidance of Sri Om Birla, which left the opposition parties rather traumatized. You could recall that at one point, 150 opposition party members of parliament were suspended from the Lok Sabha. Now, if you suspend 150 opposition party MPs, then you can have your way. There will be absolutely no resistance, and there is no need for any debate in the parliament. You can pass any law you like, and therefore, and this is the most important thing I want to say, when a party comes to have brutal dominance over the proceedings of the parliament becomes a mere extension, please mark, a mere extension of the will of the Prime Minister. I repeat, when the ruling party comes to have a brutal domination over the proceedings in the Lok Sabha, then the Lok Sabha becomes a mere extension of the will of the Prime Minister or the CEO of the state, which in our case is the Prime Minister. Now, in the 17th Lok Sabha, the onus fell on the Speaker to deal with an iron fist. Members, that is, members of Parliament of the opposite parties, at which he proved his mettle. The reason why he has been rewarded with a second term, which is a rare thing in office, that though it was accomplished very efficiently, on which he was congratulated by the Prime Minister when the Prime Minister felicitated him after appointing him, after his appointment as Speaker of the Lok Sabha a second term, the whole affair seemed a little messy. And that is a matter of concern because the parliamentary proceedings are carried live to the citizens of India. And it's very certain that there will be millions and millions of people in all parts of India who may not have liked what happened. It is a very unedifying, in fact, disturbing spectacle to see the august business of the Parliament transacted in the way it was in the 17th Lok Sabha. Now, the solution for that is avoid the unpleasant contingency of having to wrestle with the members of the opposition party or having to suspend them from the Parliament, giving them the opportunity to go out and protest and beat their breast in public and create a very bad taste in the minds of many people. The best solution for this is to attain such brutal domination over the proceedings of the Parliament so that if at all there are members of Parliament belonging to the opposition parties, they would be such a miserable, ineffectual rump who will not be able to make any difference whatsoever. So the most obvious gain in having 400 or more of members in the Lok Sabha is to deactivate, defangle and disable the opposition. And why is that such an attractive thing? Once the opposition is thus disabled and defanged, neutralized, if you like to use a military term, then the executive and the Parliament or the legislature become one. The executive and the legislature become one. Now, you have a very interesting clue to this in the way Narendra Modi was welcomed into the 18th Parliament as the discussion thanking the President of India for her address to the joint session began. When the Prime Minister came in, he was accompanied and he was also greeted with shouts of Modi, 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 as though the Parliament belonged to him and he is the hero of the Parliament. See, when a party comes to dominate in a democratic setup, what happens is that the ruling party begins to develop the hallucination that the Parliament belongs to the party and the Speaker belongs to the party. That's the reason why the BJP will never compromise on the office of the Speaker being occupied by the member of any other party. As all of us know, Chandrababu Naidu of Andhra Pradesh was very keen to have one of his MPs grace that office. And he realized soon enough that that was an impossible goal, and so he retreated in good time. Whatever behind the scene negotiations happened in this regard, we do not know, and I don't want to speculate on it. because all these things will come to light by and by. Nothing remains hidden for too long, fortunately. So, the mentality that has developed by now is that the parliament belongs to the BJP, the Election Commission of India belongs to the BJP, the Speaker of the Lok Sabha belongs to the BJP, the Chairman of the Rajya Sabha belongs to the BJP. So, for all practical purposes, there is a complete co-option of the legislature, both houses of the parliament, by the executive. So, the executive and the legislature had become one. However, that attainment was not taken to its perfection because there was still a certain number of members of parliament belonging to opposition parties which could create ripples, uncomfortable ripples, disturbances to this arrangement, and the arrangement could be questioned on various occasions in various ways. So there was a certain touch of incompleteness about that agenda, and that could be completely settled if Modi had 400 or more seats under his belt. Now, the story doesn't end there. Once the parliament gets co-opted into the ambit of the executive, the judiciary becomes de facto a very favorable agency, for the simple reason that the judiciary has to function according to the laws passed or made by the parliament. And once the parliament or the legislature is co-opted into the interests or into the proprietorship of the executive can steamroll the passing or the formation of laws that can reinforce its power, make it completely beyond the reach of any questioning. It can absolutize its power, and it can then impose its will without any fear of contradiction or resistance on the people at large. And the limitation of the judiciary is autonomous, independent of the legislature and the executive, only depending on the nature of the laws passed. The judiciary has absolutely no role in deciding which law shall be passed and which law shall not be passed. The judiciary has the right to review. It can strike down a law which in its opinion is ultra vires, or that is, which will not stand the scrutiny of the basic principles of the Constitution, the fundamental rights of citizens. But the judiciary's courage and determination to do so depends on the real effectiveness of the doctrine of separation of powers. Once the legislature gets co-opted into the executive, the judiciary is bound to lack, after all, judges are also human beings, is bound to lack the confidence, the determination, even the motivation to preserve its independence. And human nature being what it is, there's an infinite fascination for unlimited power wherever it is manifested. And therefore, judges also willy-nilly begin to fall in line. So in one stroke, all the problems as seen from the perspective of the BJP and Sri Amit Shah, Sri Narendra Modi combined perspective can be solved if they win 400 or more seats, which would mean that all the opposition parties put together would have about 140 seats, and these are highly fragmented sections, and therefore there will be absolutely no effectiveness, and they can be very easily handled. They can be neutralized effectively. So the idea that a prime minister needs at least 400 seats, basically an idea that ripples with the thirst for unlimited power And therefore, it is a desire that seems to wish to turn democracy into elected autocracy or de facto dictatorship, so that the will of one man can reign supreme over the life of the people, the country as a whole. And that's the kind of situation that is obtained in Russia, in China. And therefore, it's a very attractive model. And in the process, what happens to the health and integrity of democracy is a different question. But then by the time this goal is realized, not enough room will be left for anyone to raise that question, and such questions will not be raised at all. There is a point at which the ability to correct a system completely vanishes. Your freedom to exercise checks and balances on the exercise of power is real only up to a point. Once the state crosses that critical line, then it becomes completely immune to any kind of checks and balances, and it absolutizes its power. And at any rate, from the time man's organized existence with the political element has come into existence, every center of power, every person who has exercised power, has also experienced the keen desire, the irresistible, insatiable thirst to absolutize his or her power. So we are not talking about something peculiar to our country or peculiar to an individual. History tells us that every person who has handled power has experienced this terrible temptation to absolutize one's power and resorted to various strategies and techniques for attaining that very seemingly blissful state. And some succeeded for a short while, but many perished in the process. But nobody has had enduring success in this particular agenda, and therefore it's only from a short-term perspective that an individual, perhaps an individual who lacks a sufficient sense of history, the dynamics of history, would think that securing this kind of absolute despotic control over every aspect of governance, including the administration of justice, the justice delivery system, and the lawmaking functions, all that being combined in one particular person and one particular office, would seem to be a very highly desirable state, because then the excuse always given is that this will maximize efficiency. But this efficiency, as Rahul Gandhi very cleverly stated in his speech in the Lok Sabha, this efficiency will have to be purchased at the cost of people's freedom. Therefore, if you remember his words, he said, addressing the Speaker of the Lok Sabha, he said, Speaker, sir, the important thing is not that you run the business of the House efficiently, but that whether or not the voice of the people is heard in this Parliament. If you snuff out the voice of the people, if you exclude the incorporation of their dreams and aspirations, and if you focus your attention exclusively on ensuring that the will of the master is implemented, then it looks like a picture of efficiency, but it is deadly efficiency, and with that, enormous damage will be done to the welfare of the people. And that was the point that Rahul Gandhi was making. I hope the message was understood by the people who listened to him, and of course people who heard him by and large throughout the country, and so far as his proceedings were carried live to the houses of people. So friends, this is my very timid and tentative interpretation as to why Sri Narendra Modi ji wanted 400 or more seats, because the reason why we are right in making this guesswork, the speculation if you like, is that he could have shut the door against such speculations by revealing as to why he wanted the 400 and more seats. Insofar as he has not done it, and he has made this very explicit and emphatic statement in public, and there it is uppermost on the minds of 1.4 billion people, it is right and necessary to apply our minds to decode as to what could possibly have been his intention in seeking this bonanza, electoral bonanza. At any rate, now it's a thing of mere speculation because this great dream was not fulfilled. It suffered a body blow in the 2024 elections. Rather than secure 400 plus seats, his party slumped to 240, losing about 63 Lok Sabha seats. It's a setback that none in the party, certainly not Modi or Shah, were ready to or to expect. And I don't think they have recovered from the shock of it even today, because some of the statements made, some of the strategies used, etc., all seem redolent of a certain degree of bewilderment, which is understandable. And that bewilderment, unfortunately, has only intensified after the bypolls spread in 7 different states, totaling 13 assembly seats, of which BJP could win only 2. Congress, the India Alliance won 10, and 1 seat went to an independent. So this would further aggravate the bewilderment and the sense of disarray that the BJP as a whole would feel, and particularly its top leaders who strategized on securing absolute brutal control over the total mechanisms of India's democracy. So I think this is how history plays its games with people, and ultimately, as Hegel, who is perhaps the greatest philosopher of history, says, it is not given to human beings to create history. No man has the ability or authority to create history. History creates you. You're only a small plaything. You are a small piece on the chessboard of history. Some hand other than yourself is making the moves on the chessboard of history. Therefore, do not presume. That's what Hegel says. And Hegel has this very exalted, romantic and spiritual idea that history is spirit with a capital S, spirit working itself out, or spirit realizing itself. So every significant turn in history happens not because some important leader, some demagogue or some dictator wants to push it this way or shape it that way or direct in this manner or that manner. They may do all of that, but ultimately history will take only that direction, that shape, and history will reach only that destination which is appointed for it by a force higher than the human, higher than the human. Actually, even Arnold Toynbee, perhaps the greatest historian Great Britain has produced, Arnold Toynbee, who actually visited Delhi in 1948 to give a talk under the auspices of the British High Commission. I inherited a copy of the invitation that was sent to the then principal of St. Stephen's College to attend that lecture in the British High Commission. So Arnold Toynbee, in his interesting book, A Historian's Understanding of Religion, his magnum opus is a study of history. I'm not referring to that book, but is less frequently referred to books titled A Historian's Understanding of Religion. He says that history is continuously operated upon by 2 forces. One is the force within history. The other is the force above history. He says the force within history is the sum total of the willpower of the human agents of action. But he says the force above history is a force above the human, and nobody can really manage it, control it, or direct it according to his whims and fancies. And Immanuel Kant, in his Insights into Universal History, says something similar, but it may not complicate my presentation by bringing in more and more authors. You can look up Immanuel Kant's Insights into Universal History, and it's very fascinating to come to know some of these patterns. So anyway, So 400 seats and more, a dream that remains unfulfilled as of now, but we do not know what happened 5 years from now. Um, I do not want to speculate, though it's very tempting to do so. So here is what I have to say, and I await to hear your responses to these speculations. And repeat my caveat. It's very dangerous, it is risky, it is unscientific to make guesswork about what a person could have meant or intended, for the simple reason that we do not know that person 100%. But since a statement or important statement is made within a very well-defined context, and we are familiar with that context up to a point, then there is a logic to our making an informed guess as to what possibly could have been the intention, and that is what I have done. And I surrender to you the fruits of my speculation, my contemplation, my seeking, my analysis, whatever word you want to apply to it, and there I rest my case. Jai Hind.